Hi everyone, and welcome back into part 2 of our video. And we are in this episode, we are talking about the updated quad records. Now, I talked about Huntington, I talked about Taylor, I talked about Bethel. Now, you might be wondering, well, why do I save Indiana Wesleyan for last? Is it because they're my favorite team? Well, that is true. And again, I'm not trying to be biased or anything in these videos, but I wanted to talk about them for last because they are the most interesting team, I think, in terms of being on the bubble. So, in our last video, Indiana Wesleyan they were 5-8 in quad 1. They were 2-0 in quad 2, 2-1 and 3-0 respectively in quads 3 and 4. So now we're going to go up to Indiana Wesleyan now that they are now 5-9 in quad 1. So again, they only lost one quad 1 game since the last time. They're 2-1 in quad 2. Last time they're 2-0. So that means that since over the last 2 weeks, they've lost one quad 2 game, and that would not be, actually, I don't know how that plays out, because over the last 2 weeks, their only losses have been to Huntington and Spring Arbor, and both those teams are within the top 45 in the RPI. So I don't really understand why the Wildcats have that quad 2. Actually, they were 2-0 previously in quad 2, 3-0 in quad 3. Now they're 3-1 in quad 3, which again, I know why they're 3-1 in quad 3, and that's because of beating Grace on the road. And they are 4-0 in quad 2, or they're still 4-0 in quad 4. Last time they were 3-0 in quad 4. So that means that actually I know they beat Mount Vernon, Nazarene, and Grace. Now I know Grace, in terms of where they're at in the RPI, that 3-1 record in quad 3, that does reflect that with that Grace victory on the road. Now, the 4-0 quad 4 record as opposed to 3-0 in the last one, that has to be Mount Vernon, Nazarene. At least I would think that would be Mount Vernon, Nazarene. That went into that quad 4 window, which I don't know what MVNU's updated RPI number is. Now, if it was below 150, then that would make sense that win against Mount Vernon, Nazarene would go into quad 4. And again, you want to have as many... You want to have as many quad 1 wins as you can. Quad 3 and 4, they are important, but you don't get as much for those. But you do get something out of that. Now, for the Wildcats, now moving forward, they have 2 more. Actually, the next 2 games are against Bethel and Marion. They're both within the top 45 in the RPI. Indiana Wesleyan will be at home for both those games. So those will be quad, or at least they should be quad 1 games. So if the Wildcats win 1, lose 1, they'd be 6-10. At least I think they would finish 6-10 in quad 1, which again isn't great, but it's not terrible. And in turn, I believe they're done in terms of quad 2. Being 2-1, unless something crazy happens, I don't think they would pick up any more quad 2 games, because I don't see Grace getting inside the top 65 in the RPI. So I think more than likely the Lady Wildcats are going to finish at 3-1 and 4-0 respectively in quads 3 and 4. But again, take all this with a grain of salt, because I mentioned throughout these last couple of videos today that this does not just reflect who Indiana Wesleyan has played in the Crossroads League. This does reflect who they played overall this year, where all of their opponents currently are in terms of the RPI number, where those teams sit with that. And now again, for Indiana Wesleyan, when you look at this and you see that they've lost 1 game in quad 3. So you look at, actually, let me pull up my my RPI. Let me go back to my RPI, because I think this is going to really help. Let me see, where is, I'm trying to, what team is it? It would be College of the Ozarks, that was 1, and St. Thomas. Okay, College of the Ozarks is 43rd in the current RPI. College of the Ozarks was 43rd. So again, So for Indiana Wesleyan, their latest RPI or their latest quad record's not too terribly bad. So we talked about where they were in the quads or the previous quads. So now I want to mention before ending this video, I want to see where the College of the Ozarks and St. Thomas both are and the latest RPI and where they were in the previous RPI, because this is going to definitely help in trying to figure this out. And in the last RPI, you had College of the Ozarks was 39th. This time they're 43rd. So again, that means that when we look back to our quads and we see Indiana Wesleyan, they're 2-1 in quad 2. And previously they were 2-0, so they lost. So that must mean, let me see, where now St. Thomas in the last RPI, St. Thomas was 62nd. So that means that Indiana Wesleyan had only lost one game in quad 3 last time, because they were 2-1 in quad 3. So meaning that would be because that game was on the road. St. Thomas, now again, that would be where St. Thomas was at in December. So again, the last RPI, St. Thomas was, 62nd. So when they played, because this RPI, January 5th, where was St. Thomas then? They were 42nd. So that would be originally that was a quad 1 game against St. Thomas, because the previous RPI was December 15th, before the Lady Wildcats, right before they played St. Thomas. So again, that RPI in mid-December would not reflect that game. The RPI January 5th would as well, as well as the College of the Ozarks game. So at that time, St. Thomas was 42nd in the RPI, so meaning that was a quad 1 game for the Lady Wildcats, and College of the Ozarks was 52nd in the RPI at that time. So, and the Indiana Wesleyan won that game, and that would mean that the Ozarks would have been the Ozarks would, that game, and that was technically a neutral site, so I'm not technically sure how that would work in terms of that particular game. But for Indiana Wesleyan, that would have been that. Well, they were, I guess you could say Indiana Wesleyan was the quote home team in that game, even though it was played at St. Thomas. So that actually would have been a quad 1. So St. Thomas was 42nd. So that was a quad 1 originally there. And then the last RPI, it would have been off. It would have been reflective off of Monday, February 2nd, because that's when the last RPI was. Now, at that time, the St. Thomas was 59th in the RPI, so that would have been a quad 2. I'm pretty sure that would have been a quad 2 loss, or in that RPI, or in that RPI update on the 2nd. And no, it couldn't have been, because Indiana Wesleyan was 5. They were 2-1 in quad 2. And actually, no, that's actually as of today. But again, I'm not totally sure how all that, but I do know now that based on the current RPI, the Ozarks is 43rd. So the Wildcats, so actually that win against the Ozarks, that would, because Indiana Wesleyan's below 45th in the RPI, that would make it a quad 2 game now against the Ozarks, and Indiana Wesleyan won that game. So yeah, they would be 2-1, and they previously were 2-0 in quad 2. Now they're 2-1. So St. Thomas now is dropped. Where's St. Thomas? And again, I apologize for this video being 9 minutes. Okay, St. Thomas actually has fallen all the way to 72nd. So yeah, that means that, so for Indiana Wesleyan, that would be a quad 2 loss against St. Thomas, because Indiana Wesleyan's below 45th in the RPI, St. Thomas is 72nd. Now, if the Wildcats were still in the top 45 in the RPI, then that would be a quad 1 game and loss, meaning that the Wildcats would be 5-10 in quad 1 instead of 5-9. So yeah, that definitely makes a lot more sense. That now is a quad 2 loss for Indiana Wesleyan because they were previously 2-0 in quad 2, because in the last RPI St. Thomas was actually right above 65th. Now because St. Thomas has dropped below 65th, then therefore that means that it's now a quad 2 loss. So that's the only quad 2 loss for the Wildcats, and at least so far. And now for being 3-1 in quad 3, because last time they were 3-0, I believe they were actually 2-1 last time. Again, I'm not totally sure how that works. Again, I'm probably missing some teams that they played before that were at wherever point in the RPI. So therefore, that's probably where I'm getting a little bit confused, so to speak, of where they sit in terms of why they gained a quad 4 win, which probably was because of Mount Vernon Nazarene. Well, I don't know. Again, I know this it can be very confusing. I apologize if it is, because of course I'm brand new to this. This is my very first year looking at the ARC plus the RPIs and the quads. So again, bear with me on it. I'm learning it. I hope you're learning it as well. So again, you know, I apologize if I seem like I'm very confused, which again, I'm not trying to be. I'm just trying to figure, again, I'm learning this. Like I learn visually, again, but I mentioned this I think in my last video, that I learn by watching other people, whether it's in person or watching other videos. So and I've been like that for a very long time. So that is a look at that. So again, so for the Lady Wildcats, you're 4-0 in quad 3. And again, this is going to change because the final updates come out, I believe, Monday, March 2nd. So that is going to be interesting, especially because if St. Thomas goes back up above 65 in the RPI, then therefore that would actually, I don't know, it's definitely getting a little bit more interesting. So again, I apologize. Of course, I'm still, you know, in the process of learning all of this. Now, I do know for the Wildcats, but see, then again, they were 5-8 last time, and they're 5-9 this time. So you kind of wonder, because they played, since the last quad records came out, they played Spring Arbor and Huntington. So I don't really understand why they only lost one game in quad 1, and why they only dropped one game in quad 2. I mean, I'm not totally sure on that, to be honest. Again, I'm kind of, again, still, I'm in the learning curve of all this, but for the Wildcats, you know, you played Huntington and Spring Arbor. Those should have been quad 1. Now, actually, the home game against Huntington, yeah, that one I understand, because that was at home, and Indiana Wesleyan at the time was, when they played Huntington at home, they were within the top 45 in the RP. Actually, they were, yeah, right before they hosted Huntington, they were in the top 45. So yeah, that game was a quad 1 game that they lost, and now that they've dropped below 45th in the RPI, that still is a quad 1 game. Now, when they went on the road to Spring Arbor, they were still 40th in the RPI when they went to Spring Arbor. They lost that game. Spring Arbor, though, was within the top 30 in the RPI. So, yeah, I don't really understand that from that aspect, because that should have been a quad 1 game as well, even though the Wildcats were on the road for that game. That should have been on the road. So I don't really, I'm not really sure on that. That is for sure. But for the Wildcats, I do know that their last 2 games definitely should be quad 1 games. I shouldn't say definitely quad 1, but again, it's going to be interesting to see how all that plays out. That is for sure. So again, thanks so much for tuning into this video with me. I hope that these videos were very helpful to you today, and that you were able to learn something. Or hopefully you were able to learn and understand this formula a lot better. And I know that I am still learning this, obviously, because again, this is my very first year in doing this. So I'm still, in the learning curve just like you are. So again, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if it was super helpful to you, please either like, comment, or subscribe. Any one of those options helps me out greatly, and I will either be back with you tomorrow looking over the final, or looking over the current ARC numbers. If that is not out by mid-afternoon tomorrow, then that video will be pushed back to Wednesday. So again, make sure that you stay tuned for that. And please subscribe to my channel as well if you have not already done so, if you're brand new here to my YouTube channel, because this is the place to be over the next 3.5 weeks, and even beyond that, especially once we get into national tournament, with recapping all of the games for the Crossroads League schools that make it. So again, make sure you stay tuned for all of that, and as well as I will be printing out a national tournament bracket for the second straight year, and I will be sharing an update with you on that, going over after each individual round where my record stands and my second year of doing it. So again, this is the place to be really over the next month and a half as we get through a national tournament in terms of the opening rounds, the Sweet 16, the Elite 8, the Final 4, and then the national championship game. Again, this is the place to be over the next month and a half. So please subscribe to my channel if you have not already done so you are first notified whenever I upload these episodes, because I'm going to be sharing a lot of important information with you. So again, please make sure that you stay tuned for all of that. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you either tomorrow or Wednesday going over the updated ARC numbers. God bless.